This is going to be a new and happy show. Though change has never been as rapid as it is today, adapting to new circumstance is so crucial to our survival that love of the new is hardwired into our brains at the deepest levels. The number of new things we confront, from products to information, has quadrupled in the last 30 years with no signs of slowing. In New, Understanding Our Need for Novelty and Change, WINIFRED GALLAGHER points out that 15% are what she calls neophiliacs, biologically predisposed to passionately pursue new experiences. Another 15% on the other end of the spectrum are neophobes, who resist change, and most of us fall in the middle. Now, in today's fast-paced world, she argues we must reconnect with the original evolutionary purpose of our attraction to the new, of neophilia, to help us learn, create, and adapt to new things, but not all new things, to new things that have real value, and dismiss the rest as distractions. That's the key to survival, and that's the key, she believes, as it was when these traits first began. That's the key again today. WINIFRED GALLAGHER has written for magazines from the Atlantic Monthly to Rolling Stone. Her books include Just the Way You Are, How Heredity and Experience Create the Individual, which was a New York Times notable book of the year. The Power of Place, How Our Surroundings Shape Our Thoughts, Emotions, and Actions. And one that I really liked, and we did an interview on that one when it came out, Rapt, Attention and the Focused Life. I definitely recommend that one. It's a really good survey of what science now knows about attention and how crucial it is to the quality of our lives. So, welcome again, WINIFRED GALLAGHER.
I'm delighted to be back.
Great. I like listeners to get a feel for the people behind the work and the ideas that we talk about. So, how do you tell the story of your personal path to the work that you're doing today? Feel free to cite turning points, moments of decision, mentors, that kind of thing.
I really think it goes back to my teenage years, which were spent on a farm in Chester County, Pennsylvania. The country looked very much, if you've ever seen an Andrew Wyeth painting, he lived just down the road, so it was that kind of a milieu. And we were fortunate enough to have a lot of animals, horses and a cow and a goat and a bunch of chickens and some dogs and cats. And I became really fascinated with different individuals, animal and human, in the way they express their temperament, which is personalities, more a biological, heritable foundation. So that got me interested in my big question, which continues to absorb me, is why we are the way we are and what we can do about it. By the time I grew up and moved to New York and got a job, I was fortunate enough to be working at Time Incorporated when they started Discover, the science magazine, which they no longer own today, but they did start it, and I got to work as early as the second issue and was very fortunate in having an editor there who allowed me to start writing about this interest of mine, and here we are 7 or 8 books later.
Yeah, very good. Let me ask you, was it ever a choice between a path of actually being a scientist or being someone who writes about science?
I think when I was younger, I thought about maybe because I was so into animals, I actually considered becoming a veterinarian. But then when I went on to school at the University of Pennsylvania, I became very interested in art and architecture and English literature and all kinds of things that you get into with a liberal arts education. And I sort of lost that idea of pursuing a scientific career, but I managed to come back to it later, I think, with a liberal arts perspective, which I think is a good thing to have when you're writing about science.
Yeah. That's WINIFRED GALLAGHER. I interviewed you on your previous book, as I mentioned in the introduction, Rapt, Attention and the Focused Life. And if you could, that one came out of a personal experience, didn't it?
Yes, it did. I was diagnosed with kind of a very nasty case of breast cancer. It was pretty far advanced. I didn't have such a hot prognosis. And it was one of those moments when you sort of surprise yourself. This came out of the clear blue. I had no preparation for it, as I'm sure is the case for most people, but I found that within about 15 minutes or so, I had seized on the idea that this nasty piece of news, really wanted to monopolize my life and however long it was going to last, and drain all of my attention, take all of my attention, and that I just didn't want to do that. I wanted to focus on living my life for however long it would be. I have 5 kids, and that very week, my youngest kids, teenagers, were just about to start high school, and I had a book contract to do, and I just decided that I was going to spend every minute I could pushing forward with my life and just let the doctors do what they had to do with my physical form. And I was amazed at how well that strategy worked. I don't think I'm not saying it's a panacea or it's going to work for everyone, but it really, really worked for me. I can't say that time was the happiest time of my life, but it certainly wasn't the most unhappy time of my life either. I pretty much was able to, except for short periods when I was just simply too sick to work, I managed to get up in the morning, go across to my office and work and make dinner for my family and go to yoga and take walks and go to movies and do things that I enjoyed. And I spent not very much time thinking about, the kinds of fears and dreads that you could spend your time thinking about in that situation.
Right. So to you, one of the crucial aspect in that was that you decided you were going to direct your attention. You were going to pay attention to your attention.
Exactly. And then I discovered my hero, William James, wonderfully said that your life is what you choose to attend to. Attention is a volitional thing. We can't always pick what events are going to happen to us, but we can pick where we are going to direct our attention.
Very good.
And I found that worked really well, and that took me, then I wanted to know why, and I ended up doing a lot of research on the subject of attention.
And that's what ended up in the book, Rapt. With a few years' distance from Rapt, how has your thinking or your experience evolved with regard to attention, or has there been some breakthrough scientific research that's changed your understanding since you wrote it?
Well, I actually got the idea to write new towards the end of my time of going around and talking about Rapt. I believe an NPR commentator asked me the question, is there something that you wish you had included in Rapt that you didn't? And I sort of surprised myself by blurting out the fact that we're addicted to novelty. And after I got off the phone, I started to think about that. And I ended up, because in fact we are very dramatically attracted to new things in life, to, at the most fundamental level, both the risks and the rewards that impact our survival are much likelier to come from something new or different in your environment from the same old thing. Even a newborn baby, a few hours old, will stare at a new image for about 41 seconds and then tune out on that image, get bored with it if you show it repeatedly. For the same reason, you can't help glancing at the TV in a public place because you're hardwired to notice novelty and change. And so I started to pursue that idea of where do we get that attraction to novelty and where does it take us. And it actually took me way back to our beginnings in the African continent where we all evolved.
You know, it's interesting. I was looking back at the interview I did with you on Rapt, and this exchange happened between us. I mentioned, and so maybe I am that person, I mentioned addiction to new email and texts, and you said, I'm quoting you, if I had to do over again, that's something I would pay more attention to in reporting for the book. I think that we, in a very real sense, this is true, evolved to be very attracted to novelty, to what's new, what's fresh, for the very basic reason that back in the days when we were hunters and gatherers, we were likelier to make dinner out of something that was new on the scene than something that had been around forever. And there you go. And you said, we do crave novelty, and I think these electronics supply it. So what did you, besides that spur of curiosity, which of course writers that are able to actually pursue their curiosity didn't end up with books on the things they're curious about are the lucky ones, I assume. But what did you hope to accomplish with this new book?
I think that dealing with novelty is one of the great challenges of the 21st century. For most of our history, up until, I'm going to just pick almost an arbitrary date, let's say around 1850, novelty for most folks was new things were few and far between. People were seeking novelty, seeking excitement. Once the Industrial Revolution started to pick up steam, we rapidly had not only lots of new inventions, but inventions that exposed us to more novelty on their own. Things like the automobile and the telephone were not only new in themselves, but they vastly expanded your exposure to other new stimuli, radio, television. And then, of course, as you mentioned in your introduction, just since 1980, we are now crunching 4 times more information, more data than we did. And we're using the same old
right
to do that. So we have to we are moving from being seekers of novelty, our ancient ancestors, seekers of novelty and excitement, to having to become editors of novelty.
Mm-hmm.
We have to figure out how to use this this deluge of novelty, and it's a lot of it is electronic information, but it's not only electronic information; it's consumer products. I read somewhere the other day that there are now something like 165 brands of blue jeans. I'm sure some of the listeners remember, as I do, when if you wanted a pair of jeans, you got Levi's or Wranglers.
Right.
That was pretty much it.
Yeah.
I remember when if you wanted loafers, you got brown ones or black ones. So it's not just information, although that is an enormous issue with digital technology.
A quote you have is, "The tendency to either approach or avoid novelty is the most important stable behavioral difference among individuals in the same species." That's a pretty big statement.
It is. It is a big statement, but nothing reveals your personality more clearly than your emotional reaction to new things over time and across many situations.
So talk about those 3 different kind of, as I said, quoting you, 15% on one end, 15% on the other, and 70% in the middle.
And this is true in human research on temperament and also primate research on temperament, which is probably not an accident. About 15% of us are the very adventurous, extreme novelty seekers who I call neophiliacs. And these folks can live too fast and die too young, but they can also explore and experiment and push the envelope for the rest of us in very productive ways. I'm thinking of the late Steve Jobs. I'm thinking of the very interesting character, the former Ohio Senator John Glenn, who had been, before that, a famous test jet pilot, a Top Gun guy, and became an astronaut and then became a senator. If you are one of these folks, the downside of that is your life can become feeling scattered and unfocused, and you might have to practice using your neophilia like a laser instead of like a floodlight, by focusing it on things that are really of enduring value and importance, rather than just being distracted by every new thing that comes along. But these can be very, very dynamic people. I think Bill Clinton is another great example of a neophiliac who just keeps the new stimuli coming, and he just thrives on that kind of excitement and generates a lot of positive as well as negative.
Well, and that's what got him in trouble, isn't it? Yes.
Yes, exactly. It's the same thing. So it needs to be controlled and focused. At the other end of the spectrum, and I want to stress here that both neophiliacs and neophobes, and in fact all of us, there are always pluses and minuses with every temperament. There's no such thing as one that's just perfect. Neophobes also have their pluses and minuses. The 15% of us who prefer to avoid risk and like things that are familiar and enjoy routines, that can sound a little dull, but in fact, if there had been more of those careful, risk-averse sorts on Wall Street, we might have avoided a major recession. Neophobes tend to have a thoughtful, reflective nature that is very well suited for working in science and academia and the arts. I like to say that Paradise Lost was not written by a party animal. We need reflective, sensitive, careful people, and we need people to say we better slow down and think about this before we jump right in. Now, the 70% of us who are neophiles of a more moderate degree, we can lean in either of those two directions. We are not biologically primed to respond in a knee-jerk style to new things in an extreme way, the way the people at the opposite ends are, which gives us more time to consider how we want to react and gives us more behavioral options. The important thing to realize is that all three of these groups are crucial because evolution ensures survival in the population, not the individual.
That's right.
So we need a balance between these adventurous, thrill-seeking types and these cautious, risk-averse sites, and this roughly 1-5-1 ratio benefits the group. I like to think of our ancestors back in Africa where we evolved coming up to a whitewater river, and on the other side of the river is unexplored territory, and you have the neophiliacs saying, wow, let's get over there. There could be terrific game to hunt. Look at the fruit. We can see it from here. Plus, it's going to be really cool going across the whitewater river. It'll be really fun. Then you have the neophobes saying, are you nuts? Are you crazy? We have no idea what's over there. At least on this side of the river, we know what's happening. We know how to keep ourselves safe. And we're going to drown if we try to cross that river. And then you have the majority of the group being informed by both of these viewpoints and hopefully coming up with a consensus that works well for the group. That's the way it's supposed to work. That's the way it's supposed to work right now in our country politically, and it doesn't seem to be working that way. But that is nature's way of supporting the survival of the population.
Right. What I hear is nature's way, and of course nature, what shows up today is what has worked so far, so that's how we know it's nature's way, that there's some that'll edge us forward, some that'll pull us back, and then we'll make decisions. I'm Terrence McNally, speaking with WINIFRED GALLAGHER about her new book, New, Understanding Our Need for Novelty and Change. A lot of this goes on in brain chemistry, right? I know there's a whole chapter on brain chemistry, and I, like you, love that stuff, but I'm sure by now you're able to do this one briefly.
Yeah, we have various degrees of enthusiasm for novelty and change, as we were just saying, and those variations reflect certain genes that affect our balances of a major neurochemical called dopamine. Like neophilia, dopamine is really all about wanting. It makes you want things. It's about anticipation and the pursuit of novelty and rewards. So if we have different levels of that neurotransmitter, it's going to change our motivation to engage with the new. And certain variants of a specific dopamine gene called DRD4, specifically its 7R, 5R, and 2R variants, are particularly linked to a nervous system that becomes very strongly aroused by novelty and rewards, adapts to them very quickly, gets over them very quickly, and is thus ready for more excitement. This is the person who, as one researcher said to me, imagine like the greatest roller coaster in the world, one of those ones that people come from all over to ride on, and you have, the neophobe saying, I'm not getting near that thing. You have the moderate neophile saying, well, I've gone it once just to say that I did, and then you have the neophiliac who has this nervous system that will be very excited by the roller coaster and get over it very quickly and want to go on right away again.
Yeah. Now, are there differences since it expresses itself through neurochemistry? Are there differences by gender about this spectrum, and are there differences by age?
There are definitely differences by age. Anyone who has ever been a teenager or raised one knows that novelty-seeking behavior kind of peaks in the late teens, and by the time you're about 60, it's usually about half of what it was when you were, say, 20. And this, I thought, was a very interesting and funny part of reading Keith Richards' book, his biography called Life, I believe. Even Keith Richards was probably the world's leading neophiliac on many different levels. Even by the time he hit his 60s, even Keith is calming way down and likes to hang out quietly with Patty and the family. So that there definitely is an age factor there. The gender story is not as conventional as you might at first think. I think when we think about extreme novelty seekers, we think of big wave surfers or astronauts, those types of big game hunters and those types of adventurous folks. But actually, for women, the high novelty seeking women seem, at least and this is a fudgy area in research where some studies will show a gender difference and some won't. But there is some suggestion that rather than going into those physical risk activities, that high novelty-seeking women are more interested in alternative lifestyles, in adventure travel, in having diverse groups of friends, and just it's a trait in one personality scale that's called openness to experience, openness to new experience. So there might be a gender difference, but it's probably more in how the trait is expressed
sure.
than in the difference in the number of neophiliac men and women.
And what about culturally I guess I mean culturally or nationally? I've often assumed that the United States, for the most part, a nation of immigrants or descendants of immigrants, would, you'd think, have more people who crave novelty because at some point they were the ones who craved crossing an ocean, perhaps. And
you would be right about that. Like individuals, societies vary in their approaches to the new and different, and sometimes for biological reasons as well. This is a well-recognized finding that people with certain temperaments are attracted to certain environments and not others. In our nation of immigrants, where unless you're a Native American, you or your ancestors had to come here often in rather perilous or demanding circumstances from someplace far away. Just that in itself helps explain the fact that a hefty 25% of Americans carry one of those novelty-seeking genetic variants that's associated with more extreme novelty-seeking, and those same genes are very rare in other countries, particularly traditionally risk-averse, conservative culture of China. The 7R genetic variant of DRG4 is extremely rare in China, although it did exist there at one time. So I think it's not an accident that innovation has always been traditionally very much prized in America, and risk-taking is considered the norm here. That's the way you succeed. You take a risk and you make it big.
Interesting. So obviously the way this will play out economically over the next few years, with China having so much muscle but not so much of an urge to innovation, will be interesting.
Well, interestingly, the Chinese government in 2010 announced a big program trying to reward citizens for coming up with very creative patents. Apparently, there are two types of patents, and one is a real innovatory type, and the government is trying to reward people coming up with those types of inventions by giving them better housing and other rewards. So I think even the culture is recognizing that they want to, increase the number of people who want to innovate.
Yeah, but I think we can both understand there's got to be a tension there when you want to retain authority and encourage innovation. And they haven't had to confront it so much because they could make what other places innovate. But at this point, they may have to, to really stay on the trend they're on, they're going to have to learn to innovate themselves. I think that's an interesting thing to watch over the next few years. Finally, last question, WINIFRED GALLAGHER. We're talking about her book, New. What have you learned that you think can be most helpful to listeners?
I think the very most important thing is that your neophilia, your ability to engage with the new and different, the way to direct that is to go deep into a subject that's something that's important to you, that has some value. So if you really care about saving the coral reef or Buddhism or political change, you want to devote your novelty-seeking behavior to go deep into those subjects, as opposed to the danger of using your neophilia in a wide, shallow, scattershot way, so that you're just sort of spreading it all over the place and not getting anywhere with it. The example being going online and you see you've got a catalog sale message from LL Bean, and you don't really need anything, but you go on and you click and you say, oh, the bedroom slippers are only $9.95, and you click, and then before you know it, you're on to HuffPo, and you're learning about Kim Kardashian, and you look up and it's like 90 minutes or even 2 hours later, and you say, what did I do with that time? That's using neophilia in a wide, shallow way, and that's much less productive.
Yeah, well, that's neophilia using you rather than you using neophilia. Okay, again, the book is new, Understanding Our Need for Novelty and Change, and as you can hear in this last answer, how to harness that so that it really works for us. Thank you to WINIFRED GALLAGHER. Keep up the good work.
Thank you. I was very pleased to be with you.